Thank you. Madam Clerk, if you will, continue with the roll call.
Banks,
Present.
Collins, Simmons, Tamayo, Reyes,
Present.
Guy, Akil,
Present.
Ingendella, Valdez,
Present.
Irvin.
Let the record show that all members of the Citizen Review Board are present, with the exception of Mr. Tamayo, Dr. Collins, Ms. Simmons, Devin Egadella, and Mr. Irvin. At this time, I will ask the Vice Chair, Mr. Reyes, to read the meeting guidelines.
The duties and responsibilities of the Citizens Review Board are to review completed department investigations involving use of force and cases of importance and interest to the community or the city, determine whether the disposition of reviewed cases was consistent with department policies and procedures, review matters of importance or interest and make recommendations regarding the handling of these matters, determining whether any revisions or additions to department policy and procedures are appropriate in reviewing matters of or importance or interest, and report findings and recommendations to the mayor and chief of police. Cases that are brought before the Citizens Review Board are closed internal affairs cases that have been investigated and brought to the police chief for disposition. It is the Citizens Review Board's job to review the cases and render an opinion as to whether the investigation was done according to department policies and procedures. The Citizens Review Board members are provided the investigative files in advance of the meeting. The Citizens Review Board will hear from the department whenever matters of interest or importance are requested for review by the board or the department. The coordinator for the board is Captain Patrick Mesmer. Any person who wishes to make a complaint concerning a matter may be considered by the Professional Standards Bureau. Should see Captain Mesmer for information on how to file a complaint. The board should not discuss matters where the city or the department may likely be a party in litigation.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. We'll now move on with item 4, approval of the minutes from the meeting of January 25th, 2022. Are there any questions or provisions? Hearing none, I would need a motion and a second to approve the minutes.
I'll make a motion.
A second.
Board member Carlos Valdez has made a motion to approve the minutes of Tuesday, January 25th meeting. Mr. Reyes has seconded the motion of the approval of the minutes of the Tuesday, January 25th meeting. Any further discussion? We will now continue with the vote. All in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, please show by raise of hand. The motion passes. Thank you. We will now, I understand that we are blessed with the presence of our Chief Select, Ms. Mary O'Connor, is here tonight, so I'd like to take this opportunity to allow her to address the board, and we continue with the agenda of item 5. Welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Good evening, Board.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I just wanted to take this opportunity, number one, to come and introduce myself to you, tell you a little bit about my past, my history here at the Tampa Police Department, and then talk to you a little bit about what I'd like to do in the future moving forward, and then take a few questions. I have a citizen event that I'm supposed to be at in about 30 minutes, so I'm going to be, talking to you. Again, I could take a couple of questions, but then I have to go to another event. I'm trying to do my best to get out into the community as much as I can right now, just to get to know people. I think that there's really no greater way to get to know someone than face-to-face communication, and in this society that we've been in for the last couple of years, being plagued with COVID and going to, virtual, there's just no substitute for being able to get out here and talk to you. So I appreciate the opportunity tonight. I am a retired 22-year veteran of the Tampa Police Department. I started working here in January of 1994. I was one of 26 people that were hired on in January of '94 after a 4-year hiring freeze at the Tampa Police Department. So a lot of my classmates that I came on the department with had been previously laid off from the department, and they were very happy to come back. So I patrolled the streets of Tampa for years, and before I got promoted to my first assignment, I was an economic crime detective for many, many years, and then I started to work my way through the ranks, sergeant, lieutenant, so on, so on. I submitted my paperwork for longevity retirement in May of 2016. I had served just over 22 years at that point. On a personal note, my husband, Keith O'Connor, and I met at the department. We raised 2 children, and Keith stayed working for the department when I went home to kind of be a full-time mom for a while. But I realized very quickly after being there for a couple months that I wasn't done with this profession. So what do? I went out for the next 5 years that I've been separated from TPD, and I engaged in some professional and personal growth opportunities. Specifically, I've worked on large law enforcement related programs with Department of Justice, and I taught leadership classes for an organization called FBI LEDA, which is the Law Enforcement Executive Development Association. So I've been traveling the country for the last several years, engaging with and speaking to law enforcement officers nationwide. All of that experience and the opportunity to come back now and serve the city that I so dearly love is going to just do great things for the police department and the community, because I have seen the way other cities around the United States do some really amazing things and not so amazing things. So I am proud to say that, you know, I am the chief select of the greatest police department in the nation that serves the greatest community in the nation. So I'm very excited to be here. So there's 3 things that I would like to do first for the department and for the community. Number 1, I want to re-engage community engagement, if you will. What does that mean? Going back to the COVID era of Zoom, I want our officers to go out and serve the community that they are here to protect. And what does that mean? It means getting out of the car. It means, you know, having cell phone numbers. It means having instant access to the community that they serve. So I want to take community engagement to the next level. I also want to reduce violent crime. I was telling you about some of the DOJ programs I've worked for. I worked for one of them called the National Public Safety Partnership. It's PSP for short. The National Public Safety Partnership engages and sends subject matter experts by DOJ into the most violent cities in America to try to reduce violent crime. I've worked with Memphis, Tennessee, and I've worked with Kansas City, Missouri most recently. And I'm, you know, very proud to say we don't have problems here in our community like some of those larger cities do. But I have identified some initiatives that other cities do to try to reduce violent crime, and one of them is engaging social services more. So the people that we serve, we come, we answer the call for service, maybe we arrest a suspect, maybe we don't. It doesn't stop there. Domestic violence victims need social services. The root cause of a lot of violent crime is trauma. And I think that partnering with the police and the social services and being able to bridge the gap, not only for the call for service, but beyond the call for service, is very important. And that's something that I want to do. The third thing that I want to bring to the department and the community is wellness initiatives and wellness programs. I think going back to what's happened in the last couple of years, civil unrest, everyone knows the events that have gone on, a national global pandemic, you know, we're a damaged society. And I think that, you know, going back to having a healthy workforce is going to translate to serving a healthy community. I think that the relationship building can really work well with good wellness initiatives. I want to do like mentorship programs for my officers, but I also, again, want to have a healthy workforce so they can better serve the community. So those are the 3 kinds of initiatives that I want to do. Again, I'm very grateful, very honored, and very blessed to be back with the finest agency in the nation, serving the best community in the nation. So I thank you for the opportunity to address you tonight. Let's talk a little bit about, you know, what I believe our relationship is going to be. I think that, you know, any recommendations you make to the department are going to be taken with wide open eyes and ears. They are going to be very valued because going back to relationship building, we have to do this together. We have to make sure, I think anyone can agree that there's always room for improvement, not only personally, but professionally, and anything that you guys feel TPD can do better, I welcome the recommendations. I welcome your input, and I'm just here to, to make sure that this process works smoothly and that there are, everything available to you resource-wise that you have from the Tampa Police Department. So I think now would probably be a good time to open it up to a few questions. If you guys have any questions, comments, anything I can address before I go to my next event. And thank you for your service, by the way. I really appreciate what you're doing for the community. You're that eyes and ears that's going to be going back to the community with what you feel here. And again, we welcome the recommendations. So, anyone?
Any questions or comments or statement for our Chief Select, Mary O'Connor? If you will, Ms. Guy.
I just want to thank you for coming to talk to us because we sometimes are the redheaded stepchildren. And we do appreciate when you show up and the officers show up. And, this is taking a lot of time off of their schedules when they do come appear before us. And we do appreciate that. And we honor the fact that you all have other things that you'd rather be doing than standing in front of us. But everyone has always been, and I'm sure they will continue to be, supportive of us. And I myself am very supportive of the police department, and I think that it's a job that people don't really understand, and we all encourage people to do ride-alongs and get more involved so they can see what a real officer does, because I think, you see people on TV, you think that's what they do, and that isn't a fact. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
Yes, I'm happy to come anytime, you'd like me to come to your meetings. I mean, I plan on coming probably pretty regularly, unless there is some other conflict, but you're serving this community, so anytime you guys have any questions or anything I can do to, beyond the work of this board as well, I welcome that, because I am dedicated to making sure that the relationship building is where it needs to be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone
Any other
else?
questions or statements or
Yeah,
comments?
a comment.
You will, Mr. Reyes?
Yes, Mr. Reyes.
Again, thank you very much for coming in and speaking to all of us. We're all public servants here, as you know, and we're all volunteers. I just want to share with you just a couple things, just some perspectives. So as a retired military veteran from MacDill, Army veteran.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. One of the reasons why I did this, as well as other community service initiatives, is for better representation of our veterans. As you know, Hillsborough County, and Tampa's the epicenter, but Hillsborough County is the most populated veteran county of 67 counties here in Florida.
Yes, sir.
And Florida is number 3 in the nation, soon to be number 2, because we will eclipse Texas. So as a result of that, I am involved in the Veterans Treatment Court here. I actually helped establish it with Judge Weiss when I retired in 2013.
Yes.
I mentioned it to you because you made a comment about trauma.
Yes.
And that is central to one of the many reasons why many of our veterans get in trouble.
Yes.
Because of service or combat-related type of trauma, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, et cetera, et cetera. So I was very encouraged when you said that.
Yes.
And it gave me hope, because I do believe personally that problem-solving courts are the way to go. And I know that we can partner well, as we do with Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, that we can partner well with the TPD in combating that social issue. The other one, and I know you're very well aware of, that many of us are also involved in, is the whole industry of human trafficking.
Yes.
And it's a big deal here, as you well know. And just to let you know, we're excited. Many advocates in our community are excited to work with you, and of course, with the police force in fighting that,
Yes.
which is a daily fight each and every day.
Yes.
So I just wanted to share that with you and and encourage you and congratulate you on your nomination.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'm very happy that you work with the Veterans Court. The Veterans Court was a newer initiative back in 2016 when I was leaving. And I remember just, all of the diversionary programs, if there's a root cause that we can address, like going back to the social services, rather than arrest our way out of the problem or, police our way out of it, I think that that's where we all, we can do great things together. And I'm, obviously the traumas that you speak of that our veterans have been through, a lot of our police officers have been through those as well. I'm very dedicated to wellness programs. I've been around the country the last few years, and I see that police officers suffer from PTSD. I mean, they respond to calls and they see things that a normal citizen does not see, and we think that we just put our badge on and we have, our cape on and we come and save the day. But at the end of the day, we take those things home with us and we live with them for the rest of our lives. And very similar to your Veterans Court, I want those types of services available for the Tampa police officers that have seen so much crisis, but still continue to go out and proudly serve their community regardless of all of those traumas that they've been through. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yes, sir, you will, Mr. Valdez.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you again for coming out to speak to us, and we look forward to working with you or the candidate that will be coming in chief of the police department. Definitely, I appreciate the fact that you're being out in the community, engaging with community members. That's a huge component to the work that we do, building that trust within the department and the community. As we all know, there's been a lot of stories in the media regarding the process, transparency or whatnot, so thank you for taking that step in being out in the community.
Sure.
You did say that one of your priorities was reducing violent crimes. I know Assistant Chief Delgado had a priority for gun violence, so I would like to see if under that priority you can also tackle more so gun violence. Last year we ended the year with over hundreds of incidents related to guns, so definitely if we can make that as priority or continue that momentum with the community forums that Chief Delgado was having, not more so having those discussions and just ending there, but more so having action towards what is coming out of those discussions is key. So like I said, looking forward to working with you, and thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Valdez, gun violence is everyone's #1 priority. I was just speaking to an association about an hour ago, and I remember the days of going to neighborhood watch association meetings and welcoming that they were complaining about littering or barking dogs or trespassing. Now everyone is zeroed in on the gun violence. The community forum, Chief Delgado is a very valued member of the team of the Tampa Police Department, and he did great things when he started up those community forums, because the community needs to have a voice at the table. They have to have a voice at the table in order for us to come up with the proper solutions to address that. The community, the forums are a good start, but I believe the dialogue needs to continue well above and beyond the forums. We are actually having our 3rd forum, I believe, this upcoming week, I want to say. Just stand by on that. Don't quote me on the date, but I believe it's coming up very, very soon. We need to have those forums maybe quarterly, and we also need to get more people to the forums. I think, I don't shy away, and none of the officers do, from speaking to hundreds of people at once. I mean, the more people we can reach, the better. We have to engage the community the way that they get information. The forums are good face-to-face communication, but we also have to talk about initiatives the Tampa Police Department is doing via social media and press conferences and ways to get out there. And it needs to be a message that every member of the department shares. So if our message is that we're going to have an initiative to reduce gun violence, everyone needs to buy into that, and everyone needs to have the same message. The last thing I want to talk about with gun violence is my first meeting this morning was with State Attorney Andrew Warren. And we had a delightful conversation this morning, and our #1 priority working together moving forward is gun violence. Because when there's gun violence happening, everything else just doesn't seem as important, because safety is priority. So thank you for that.
If you will, Reverend Banks.
Yes, thank you. Chief O'Connor, for coming out to share with us. One thing you said that really pricked my attention, and we talked about partnering with social services.
Yes.
I spent 38 years in social services with Hillsborough County.
Oh, great.
And much of the crime that we see in our community is symptomatic of deeper issues.
Yes.
And so I would be interested to hear how you would like to develop partnerships with social services so as to try to combat that at the root cause.
Yes. Kansas City, Missouri does it very, very well. You have to identify what services are out there and deconflict whether or not there's any overlap, and what the overlap is also going to identify are the gaps. So now we need to figure out who we can bring to the table to fill the gaps. But I really am a firm believer that long after the police are gone and they've done their job, that there is more follow-up that needs to be done. And the more that we can help bridge that gap to get the people the help that they need post-police involvement, the better off we're all going to be. And it helps build trust in the police department as well. We really need to have the community trust us and feel that they can call us and they feel that we're going to come and help them. And part of the trust building is having that nurturing relationship with the community and partnering with social services. So I might pick your brain on that at some point if you don't mind.
Happy to do it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Yes, so again, thank you for coming out tonight and blessing us with the opportunity to be able to engage. I think the three-step initiative is a great starter plan, and as well as getting out into the community and getting more engaged in forums of things of that nature. We have adopted in our new ordinance going out to the community and doing some forums and maybe even having some of our monthly meetings out in the community. So
Oh, that's great.
I'd like to applaud that as well.
If I may add.
If you will, Mr. Valdez, go ahead.
So like last night, Member Reyes and myself attended the Black History Month event that you all put on. So definitely, if there's any events that you're attending that you would like any of the members to participate and attend with the department, please keep us in the loop as we, take the community to our heart and would like to be present as well out there.
I would very welcome your presence at our events. I think that's a really good way to kind of bridge that, the roles and just really get to know each other, because the more you know about the Tampa Police Department and the fine work that they do, the less questions there's going to be, so there's going to be I'm going to take you up on that. So I hope you guys are ready. It's going to be a packed calendar. So I thank you for that.
So again, thank you again, and we look forward to working with you,
Thank you, sir.
in the future. And I'm sure and confident that Tampa will continue to be a safer city under your watch.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you for all you do.
If you will, we will continue with the agenda under item number 5, public comment. Are there any participants signed in for the public comment portion of this meeting? Okay. Do we have a list as far as names? Okay. Is public comment downstairs? Are they prepared to?
I can go downstairs.
They're right there.
Great. So if you will, state your name and your address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Go ahead and continue.
Okay, thank you. I'm Laurie Jones Saluku, 9713 Pleasant Oak Drive in Tampa. I'm from Bible-Based Fellowship Church, a member congregation of Hope, the Hillsborough Organization for Progress and Equality. Over the past several years, we've heard story after story from our Hope members and their family about being stopped. They have experienced racial profiling. They're pulled over, and often it doesn't result in a warning, a citation, or an arrest. This erodes trust and instills fear between the community and law enforcement. And I just want to share with you all a few of our stories. One story, I worry about racial profiling. I have been stopped and threatened with arrest while walking in my own neighborhood. Another member, my husband was stopped because he stopped after the white line at the stop sign. They pulled him out and laid him on the ground while they searched his car. Another member shared, my grandson was parked outside of his house. The cops pulled up and made him get out while they searched his car. Another story, I was stopped and harassed by multiple officers while walking to the store next to my neighborhood. I did not have my ID with me. They questioned what I was doing and didn't believe me when I said I was walking home. It was not only embarrassing to be stopped right outside of my neighborhood where my neighbors could see, but extremely traumatic and scary as a Black man. The next story, I was stopped by police because I drove a Porsche. They assumed it had been stolen. Another story, I got stopped by police because he stated I looked suspicious driving at night. Searched my car, and I felt it was racial profiling. Another woman shared this story. Her husband, who is African American, has been pulled over many times in Tampa, even though he's never had a ticket or anything. He always calls her when he gets pulled over in case anything happened. We would like to see the TPD, along with Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, begin tracking and analyzing and communicating data on all traffic stops in order to address systemic and individual bias in policing to help build trust among law enforcement and the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I believe we have two participants in reference to the public comment portion. We'll allow them a few seconds here. If you will, approach the podium.
Good evening.
Hi. Greetings. If you will, if you can state your name and address, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Thad Baraday. I'm a member of Hyde Park United Methodist and our downtown location, the Portico. I'm here speaking on behalf of HOPE, the Hillsborough Organization of Progress and Equality. We are a coalition of 25 member churches in the Tampa area. And as you heard from the first speaker, we are concerned about racial profiling. What we want is data collection, reporting, and analysis of all traffic stops that are occurring in Hillsborough County and particularly in Tampa via TPD. Tampa Police Department says that it is already collecting data on all stops, but we do have our suspicions. And as we have learned with data, particularly in the area of criminal justice reform, the devil is in the details. We've studied the dashboard that TPD maintains for bicycle stops, and we appreciate very much that TPD is maintaining this data and providing this dashboard. This level of transparency goes a long way towards building faith and trust with the community, as Chief Designate O'Connor just spoke about. And we urge TPD and the Citizens Review Board to sustain this commitment to providing openness, transparency, and accountability. But when we look at the dashboard that exists today for bike stops, we do have some issues. We have issues with the way it's reported, and we have some issues with the lack of analysis. For instance, there is no zip code level data provided to us, the public, which makes it very difficult for us to evaluate the issue of racial profiling. And the data that we see, in fact, as on the elbow shows, 57% of the stops made over the last 13 months are among blacks, much higher representation than in the general population. So we have our concerns, and as you've heard from the anecdotes, from the stories of real people in our community, we believe that racial profiling is still occurring. Thus, in developing tracking of data for all traffic stops, we are urging TPD to access the resources of an independent trained professional. And last year we held a racial profiling summit with Professor Jack McDevitt of Northeastern University, presenting to assembled leaders in the law enforcement community. Dr. McDevitt has worked with hundreds of law enforcement agencies to address racial profiling, and he is a leading, noted authority in the field. His presentation was heard by the state attorney, the public defender, the clerk of court, Temple Terrace police chief, and the Plant City police chief. Unfortunately, TPD Chief Dugan did not attend in person, although TPD was represented. We would urge new police chief designate O'Connor to attend our meetings and address this issue personally. We would also like to meet with Mayor Castor directly. So far, she has declined our meeting requests, and we would urge her to reconsider this position. We believe it is appropriate, indeed essential, for elected officials to meet with leaders in the community and to hear the concerns of our 25-member churches and their congregations. We hope Mayor Castor will reconsider our invitation and meet with us in person. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there any other participants for public comment? I will now ask whether there were any recorded comments received through the voicemail setup for this meeting.
No.
Chair Mike Schmidt, Assistant City Attorney, there were no recorded comments.
I will now ask if there were any written comments for this particular meeting.
No written comment.
That would conclude the public comment portion of our meeting. We'll now continue with item 6 on the agenda, which will allow the board to address the public commentary that we had tonight or commentary in the past. So if you will, are there any board members who would like to make a statement or have any concerns in reference to some of the public comment that we heard tonight or in reference to any public comment in the past?
Chair.
If you will, Ms. Guy.
In reference to the public comments tonight, I would be interested in seeing how TPD does track the stops, and if there are reports made on stops even when there are if there's no ticketing done, and if they have a way to verify the information. Because listening to the public comment, it does make you think that, and I'm not saying that TPD's not doing it, but I'm not privy to that, and I think it would be something that we should be interested in. You've got 25 churches who have coalesced, and that sounds pretty important to me.
Thank you, Ms. Guy. If you will, Mr. Valdez.
And I will second that. I would like to see if we can get a presentation from either somebody in data or research to be able to come talk to us and present to us and to the community. How is it that the data is tracked, and the dashboard that's online, I've been on there a few times, and you can see certain things, but certain things isn't clear and transparent. So definitely, if we can have some sort of presentation that talks to data. I know last month, Chief Delgado brought a point of the article that I had brought up to the attention that there is, data that's not being reflected accurate per se as it reflects to the community members that are reflecting. There was an article that came out on creative loafing that I referenced last month. So definitely want to make sure that we have somebody to present to us as it relates to data, as it relates to the department.
Thank you, Mr. Valdez. Racial profiling has been a long-going concern in the community. And if this data is being collected, the proof is in the numbers. At least from the data, we'll be able to it should reflect future training and things of that nature. So if the data is being collected, I think that's the main purpose of the data. So I will also be interested in finding out more about that process and how that data is being collected and what can we identify from that kind of material. Thank you for those who did show up for public comment and bringing that very concerning issue, long-lasting issue to the board. Thank you, and that is something that seems like board members have interest in as well and may be interested in looking into that further. Any other comments or statements or questions in reference to item 6?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
If you will, Reverend Banks.
Obviously, there is a perception in the community that the profiling does exist. So in addition to perhaps looking at the data that may or may not further solidify that perception, perhaps staff could look at some best practices, that the training or whatever is available, so that we can counteract the perception as well as the reality. What's out there that can help to minimize profiling in terms of training and biases that may exist in the minds of those who are on the force.
Thank you, Reverend Banks. We'll continue
Chair,
with the.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
Chair.
you will. Mike Schmidt.
Mike Schmidt, just to give staff a chance to comment on that, on the public comments. With regards to Hope, TPD has met with Hope. In fact, I believe it was just last month, maybe 2 months ago, that Chief Delgado did participate in a meeting with Hope. I was also present. There was approximately 4 or 5 TPD people on a conference call with Hope. So the chief has met with Hope even recently and has had an ongoing dialogue with Hope. So it's, I just want to clear up something, that while he mentioned Dugan wasn't available on the call, I also know that Dugan had a conflict and advised him to have that conflict. I was on that call way back when Hope had their other meeting. So TPD does participate, and the chief Delgado was on a recent call with Hope very recently. I want to clear that up. We have been in communication with Hope. We continue to be in communication with Hope. The next thing I would like to clear up is with regards to all traffic stops, TPD will be happy to bring back a policy when it's finalized. There is a policy that's currently in draft. So I don't want to comment on it tonight in detail, but I'll let you know. There has been these policies take a while sometimes to fully draft. So we've been working on a policy for months that will try to capture the data for traffic stops. So that is something that TPD has already been working on and will continue to work on, and hopefully here in the very near future we'll have a policy that we can present to you and explain how TPD is capturing the traffic stop data. That has been something that Chief Delgado several months ago was working on, and we've heard those concerns from Hope, and I know that that is something the department continues to work on.
Thank you. That's good to hear that the department is aware of that concern and does have a plan to identify if not that issue is being affected in our community. So yes, if you will, please definitely follow up with us in reference to that policy once it has been drafted.
Sure enough. Mr. Chair, Captain Pat Mesper, TPD as well. And just to follow up on Reverend Banks' comments, obviously following best practices and providing training and guidance to the officers in terms of bias-based policing and racial profiling is extremely important. And I can bring you some more details if that's the board's pleasure. But just to give you a little update, we do have bias-based profiling training pretty much on an annual basis. We've had training on fair and impartial policing. That was a implicit bias training as well that was really spearheaded by Dr. Friedel from the USS Criminology Department. In addition to that, last year the entire department went through a one-day training, a cohort training that was basically a bias-based policing training that was put on by an outside instructor that the department actually brought down here to train the entire department on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the importance of not engaging in any kind of bias-based activity. So we are aware of a lot of the best practices. I know a lot of us are members. I'm a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. the Police Executive Research Forum. We are always following their best practices for specifics about what kind of a training we can give our officers to address those community concerns of racial bias and racial profiling. So we're always looking for new ways to train our officers and make sure that they're always aware that that is an issue in the community's mind. So that's definitely not something that's lost on us, the importance of making sure our officers are aware of the issues with any kind of bias-based profiling.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now continue with the agenda, with moving on to room number 7, approval of the modified rules of procedure. Board members were provided a copy of the modified rules of procedures during the presentation presented by Ms. Kamaria upon last month January meeting. Such board members wanted to table the actual adoption of those rules of procedures. That those members aren't present here tonight. So I will move to table this particular item to next month to allow individuals to continue to review that material and be present to share with us anything that they're concerned with as well. I know Ms. Guy may need a copy as well, so we can all be on the same page.
If I could just, Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office, if I could please just have a motion from the board to continue the approval of the rules of procedure to the next CRB, Citizens Review Board meeting, please.
Chair is open to a motion.
I'll second.
Ms. Guy has made the motion to table item 7, approval of the modified rules of procedure. Mr. Valdez has seconded the motion. Any further discussion?
Yes, that was a question raised when we were waiting for to start the meeting, that under the new rules, because of a couple of people have not received their training, that we had almost zero margin for having a quorum for meetings. So if we adopt the rules without having a full cadre of people on the board, would that prohibit us from taking care of business in the future?
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office, and I appreciate the motion, and I don't know if the board has voted on the motion. Has there been a vote on the motion to continue it?
Yeah.
No, there's the motion on the floor.
It was just a second, okay. I will answer those questions when we're actually discussing the rules of procedure at that time, at the next meeting. I will answer those questions.
Oh, okay.
So there is a motion on the floor to table this item to the next month's meeting. All those in favor, please show by raise of hand. Any opposed, please show by raise of hand. Item number 7, the motion passes. Item number 7, approval of the modified rules of procedures has been tabled to next month's meeting. We'll continue with the agenda under item 8, review of investigation, starting with case number 21F-04.
Good evening, David
Good
Fernandez.
evening.
I'm a captain with Tampa Police Department. So basically, I'm District 1, that is everything west of the river, from Hillsborough all the way south to McDill Air Force Base. Before I go into the case summation, I want to let you know that this wasn't a complaint that was generated from a citizen or outside the police department. It was an internal complaint that my district latent investigation sergeant brought to me. Because when an officer writes a police report, if they don't make an arrest, it gets referred to the detective. So the detective saw this report, brought it to the sergeant's attention, and then brought it to me that there were some things that were missed. So I'll go into it. On April 2nd, 2021, Officer George Boyden and Officer Christopher Buccelli responded to 3014 West Spruce Street, referencing an assault battery that had just occurred. Officer Buccelli arrived first and came in contact with both victims. Officer Buccelli then separates the two victims and begins to interview victim Brown. Shortly thereafter, Officer Boyd arrived and conducts an interview with Clifford. At that point, Officer Boyd failed to turn on his body-worn camera, and the victim's interview was not recorded, victim Clifford. Officer Boyd then records a second interview with Clifford while he is seated in his vehicle. In this interview, it appears that he's attempting to gain cooperation with her not going forward of her being raped or the sexual battery that she told him of. Officer Boyd generates a report for the aggravated battery, simple battery, and then, like I told you, the report was submitted to the District Latent Investigation Squad for their review. In this case, there were 3 body-worn camera videos under this report, 2 with Officer Boyd and 1 with Officer Bocelli. During the review, my review of Officer Boyd's videos, victim Clifford discloses that she had been raped by the suspect during this encounter and uses that term also when she fills out her sworn statement. So that night when they interviewed her, they also had her do a sworn statement written that is also part of the police report. In that sworn statement, she states, "I did not hook up with him, he forced me to, and the condom is in the floor, is laying on the floor in the room." Furthermore, the facts of this case were that a subject unlawfully entered the residence armed with a handgun to confront victim Clifford because she told the suspect's wife, I believe previous that week, that she had had sex with him. That night, the suspect climbed through an open window and held both victims, Clifford and Brown, at gunpoint. The suspect then orders Brown to leave, pointing a gun at him, and the suspect states that she's not going anywhere. Victim Brown leaves, and victim Clifford is then sexually battered. Shortly thereafter, an unknown suspect comes in the residence and also requests sexual favors from victim Clifford. When she denies his advances, he then punches her in the face with a closed fist, and she gets a bloody nose. So the appropriate charges for this report should have included armed occupied burglary, false imprisonment, armed sexual battery, aggravated assault, and simple battery. Officer Boyd failed to disclose to his supervisors pertinent information about the incident, and most importantly, failed to disclose the sexual battery to his sergeant. Also, his police report documenting the incident failed to contain an accurate representation of the events and how they unfolded that evening. After I reviewed the case that IA did, in my disposition, I put in Officer Boyd did not actually document the events as they were conveyed to him. The sexual battery was completely dismissed by Officer Boyd. It appears that he only recorded his attempts to gain her cooperation and not going forward with the sexual battery. He documents that she had sex with him, which is a gross mischaracterization of the facts. Victim Clifford was never offered services at the nurse examiner's office. The scene was never processed. No DNA, no fingerprints, no photographs, nor was the condom ever collected. Even if the victim is not inclined to pursue criminal charges, the department still maintains the utmost integrity to investigate this offense, to include the collection of evidence. Officer Boyd's failure to communicate pertinent information and his indolent disposition documenting this incident compromise his professionalism, his ethics, and objectives as a police officer. So therefore, based on my complete review of the investigation completed by Internal Affairs of Professional Standards Bureau concerning the allegation brought forth, I recommended sustaining attentiveness to duty, which is violation of Manual Regulations 1204.05, and then I also sustained the violation of Manual Regulations 1807, failure to comply with departmental policies to witness the failure to turn on his body-worn camera. And that basically summarizes.
Thank you. Any questions from the board in reference to this particular case? Mr. Valdez.
As I read this, there was a lot of questions and a lot of different thoughts in my head. First thing I would like to share is I see on the agenda that he received a letter of counseling. Can you talk in detail as to what that letter of counseling, was that a disciplinary form or was it a memo?
It's a letter of counseling that stays in his jacket for a year. Staff looked at his previous discipline, and I believe, if I'm not correct, if Captain Mesmer wants to speak about it, I believe 7 to 8 years ago, the only thing he had was a failure to go to an off-duty job or failure to go to court. That was the only thing that was in his record. So basically, when an officer doesn't turn on the body-worn camera or doesn't write what he's supposed to do, progressive discipline, the first thing is a letter of counseling.
I do have a huge concern, being the fact that there was multiple different instances where it could have been offenses such as the sexual harassment. You know, there was multiple different, the burglary things in this case. It's not just more so a traffic stop that, oh, I forgot to turn on the camera. So I'm really concerned as to how the case was taken into consideration and the disciplinary action for this particular officer.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, if you will, Reverend Banks.
I must admit that when I read this, I had to stop and take a deep breath.
As did I. It was brought to me.
First of all, being familiar with Tampa, I don't know if this particular address was there, but I'm kind of familiar with the demographics in that area. And it seems to me that there was a disregard for the seriousness of what happened in that situation. And the victim perhaps was not given the dignity that she deserved from a law enforcement official in circumstances like that. And furthermore, just taking a deep breath and seeing a letter of counseling as a result of that, I mean, it just seems to me that this was a serious situation, and that's part of what contributes to distrust on the part of certain segments of our community when things like this happen. If this had happened on Davis Island, would that same laissez-faire attitude take place?
It doesn't go into it here, but the female was a white female.
That doesn't matter, I'm just saying.
Right now, I thought that's where you were going.
I'm saying the area.
Correct.
The Spruces.
Right, but you mentioned Davis Island.
Davis Island is an upscale, high-income community. Politically connected people live there.
No, I agree with you.
So
there's no disagreement
So that's what
here.
I'm saying. I had to take a deep breath. So even handling this case with a letter of reprimand, a letter of counseling as opposed to some serious, it just seems to me on the surface without knowing all of the details that the officer did not take it as serious as it was. And the department didn't take it as serious as it was.
Well,
that's
I
just my
think
thought.
I conveyed that to you, that I did take it seriously because this wasn't something that was brought on from somebody on the outside.
Let me interrupt.
So I did.
By saying that the end result was a letter of counseling. So the end result, in my mind, did not match the seriousness of the issue, is what I'm saying. Now, the fact that you did what you did, I applaud you for doing that. But
I understand.
okay.
Yes, and I have an additional question as well. In a situation like this, I'm not sure how the call got dispatched in, but in the case where there's sexual violations being done, what's the policy or what's the why wasn't there a woman officer on the scene and things of that nature? Is there some type of policy or a protocol with a particular case of this nature? Do we dispatch certain officers that have training in that particular field that could have handled that situation differently?
Again, Captain Messmer with Professional Standards. There are situations where a victim may request that, and if that is requested, we will try our best to accommodate that. There's not a policy that says if a victim reports a sexual battery that it must be an officer of the same gender who's dispatched. And just to give a little bit more background on this case, this call, this is kind of a convoluted case. There was no mention of any sexual battery when the caller called. The caller actually called because somebody went into their house armed with a firearm. So the comments about a sexual battery were never conveyed to the dispatcher when the call was dispatched. It was after the officers got there and the call was investigated that it actually came out what was being alleged. And some of the issues I think that involve the letter of counseling, we do have a policy, and we're governed by contract to use progressive discipline. This officer hadn't received any discipline since 2007. We've actually, when we looked at the discipline for failure to write reports, the normal discipline for that is a letter of counseling, especially in the absence of a disciplinary history of the officer. And like Captain Fernandez said, this case was actually brought to the attention of the department by the detective who got assigned the case. The victim in the case was initially, during the initial investigation, wanted to prosecute the suspect for the aggravated assault with a firearm, for breaking into the house with a firearm, and was very adamant about wanting to prosecute. And the officer definitely should have proceeded with the sexual battery investigation. When the case was referred to a detective, the victim was not cooperative with the detective about following through with any charges. The victim was not cooperative with the internal affairs investigator with trying to give a statement about what happened in the actions of the officer. So unfortunately, the only reason that we even had this case is because it was brought forth internally. Now, had the victim been more forceful and pursuing the officer's misconduct, the command staff at the time may have done a lot more than a letter of counseling. I don't know the answer to that because that's not what happened. But the victim, in the case wasn't interested in pursuing the charges that even she initially said she was interested in. So I don't know if that played a role in it or not. I think it probably did. So that's just an example of kind of one of the many facets around this case. This was a complicated, convoluted scene. When you read the police report and when you watched the body camera video about things that happened and things that happen in the future, and consensual sex the day before, but no consensual sex then, but there was actually consensual sex several days afterwards. So there was just a lot of confusion with the case. It wasn't a straightforward accusation of sexual battery. It still should have been treated that way, because all sexual battery cases need to be treated that way, because a victim may decide at the time that they don't want to prosecute, they don't want to file any charges, but they could change their mind in a couple days. That's why it's important to collect the evidence. That's why it's important to offer the victim an exam with the nurse examiner. That's why all that stuff is very important, and he didn't do any of that. I think it was mitigated a little bit because of his lack of prior disciplinary history, and our inability to get in touch with the victim to get a good statement from them about specifically what was said when the body camera was off. Because we really don't know that. We didn't get the victim's side of the story of what was said when the body camera was off. The investigation could have gone in a whole different direction depending on what the victim said happened during that conversation. But multiple times to try to get in contact with the victim by both the assigned criminal investigator and the assigned internal affairs investigator, and did not express any interest in providing a statement to us. So to give you a little background.
I do want to applaud and acknowledge the check and balance that this particular case came through an internal complaint. So that definitely recognizes there is a check and balance system in play. I selected this particular case to continue the monitoring progress of the BWCs and the underlying importance of such technology. As you mentioned earlier in the statement, there was footage, but would have had additional information into the investigation, but it was absent. So as we continue to monitor the process and progress of the BWCs, it shows the importance of having that type of technology. So that was one of the reasons why I selected this particular case. In a case of this magnitude with sexual assault, in my opinion, it has to be handled with extreme care. Was there any other follow-up? I know you all stated after the investigation, the victim didn't seem to be cooperative, but at that time frame, what type of personnel did we send to follow up with that particular victim? Because there's cases with domestic violence and things of that nature. There's a fear factor. There was been held at gunpoint. We're not sure there was other intimidations or uncomfortability there. So knowing what we knew in reference to that particular case and the follow-up plan, what type of personnel did we send out there to talk with this particular victim to see why this case why she didn't prosecute?
So there were actually, it was referred to the District 1 Latent Investigative Squad, which is the District 1 Detective Squad. The detective who was assigned the case is a female detective who actually used to be a sex crimes detective for quite some time. So her and her partner, who was another female detective, they were the ones who went out to try to talk to the victim to gain the victim's cooperation, and they were just unsuccessful in doing so. And then on a separate note, our internal affairs detective, on another occasion, on several other occasions, tried to do the same thing. In regard to the internal affairs investigation, not necessarily the actual allegations of the sexual battery, but we had female detectives who are experienced actually in that realm who were able to be assigned that case to try to make contact with the victim.
Thank you. I have to agree with Mr. Valdez and Reverend Banks in reference to Officer Boyd jeopardizing the integrity of the department. It seemed like in this particular case, in my opinion as well, there was a lack of concern, a lack of empathy, which could result in distrust. So we'll continue with any further questions or statements. Ms. Guy, excuse me, Ms. Guy.
I'm just curious about Officer Buccelli had his video on.
Correct.
Did that tell you, I mean, he was the first one to interview,
So there were actually two victims in the case. We had one victim who was the victim of sexual battery. That was the victim who Officer Boyd was interviewing.
Okay.
We had another victim who was, in the house and had the gun pointed at them as well. That was the victim Officer Buccelli was interviewing.
Okay, that.
And again, neither of the victims decided they wanted to pursue any charges afterwards.
Thank you.
No, and when Officer Buccelli interviewed the other victim, they were both, Officer Boyd and Officer Buccelli, so far away that you couldn't hear or see the interview.
Thank you. Mr. Valdez?
So I'm very familiar with a progressive discipline, and I think in cases like this is serious stuff, happening with this case. Think of it if it was your daughter, your wife, your mom. I know that if that was me, where I have my mom, my wife, or my daughter, and if I was an officer, or I was the dad of my daughter, and just to know that the officer is still either on duty or just got a piece of paper saying, hey, here's a little memo or counseling, I have a significant problem with that. Because again, even though the victim didn't want to press charges or wasn't cooperating, just knowing that this could have been a case is critical. And again, going back to the integrity of the department and how we're doing business is a concern for me, particularly with this case. So I get the progressive discipline, but this is something that should have been taken, escalated more than just a letter of counseling.
So the chair is open to a motion on whether we concur or not concur or unable to reach determination regarding the disposition and the disposition of the complaint and the discipline. So it seemed like there was a lot of concerns of the board in reference to the disciplinary action taking place after violations were sustained.
I just have one comment. I think the regulations that were violated, as in the letter states, were probably the reason that the discipline was carried out as it was, because these two regulations that were not followed, they don't seem as serious as this looks to us from the outside. Are you following what I'm saying? The two things, the regulations that were identified that he did not follow, probably the discipline for those two regulations, if it's your first offense, is to get a letter of counseling. Would that be true?
So it would depend on the seriousness of what happened. So in one case, for instance, we had, I believe one of the allegations was attentiveness to duty. I mean, there have been other cases where we have officers who have failed to write reports, and the report they failed to write was when they took somebody's property and threw it in a dumpster rather than put it into evidence or put it into property. And those cases have been much more serious because they've taken somebody's property and they've disposed of it and didn't document it. So it kind of does depend on the individual circumstances. And I would agree with the board that the not handling a sexual battery investigation properly is a serious issue. I think, again, had we been able to interview a cooperating victim and heard what was said by the officer, during that time the body worn camera was off, there's a very good chance it could have gone in a different direction. If she had said that the officer was talking her out of making the report or saying you don't really want to do this or really doing something along those lines to where he's trying to influence her, there could have been a more severe discipline imposed here. So it kind of does depend on the severity of the case that wasn't documented, or attentiveness to duty as a catch-all in one way. It could mean you didn't put somebody as a passenger in a traffic crash report, or it could mean this. So it does depend on specifically what happens and what are the adverse impacts based on the officer's actions. That does get taken into consideration.
But I thought I read where the officer was trying to coerce her into not going through with charges. Maybe I misread it.
Right, no,
As part of the
when you
report.
review the body worn camera, and he speaks with her, he's interviewing her, he's like, okay, so I understand you don't want to do anything about the sex battery, right? So it's kind of like he's leading her to say no, and he wants to have that captured on camera.
So in my mind, it's more than just a failure to do the paperwork. It goes to that very behavior of not taking this incident as serious as it should. But there again, I don't want to belabor the point.
Yes, and if you will, Mr. Reyes.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend. Yeah, I've been sitting here, I was troubled reading this over the last few days, and I wanted to listen to everybody else to see what was their sensing, and they're all talking about the same things that I've been thinking of, and the way that I can try to rationalize this in my head is when I read here where it says, quote, it appears he is attempting to gain her cooperation. To me, that goes to, without getting into any legal terms, but that gets into the intent piece on this police officer. Then when you look at the provisions, and I read the provisions over and over, they appear to be, and there's, I'm not criticizing the provisions, they are what they are, but they appear to be more vanilla. They appear to be more, hey, you shall either comply or not comply. It's more of the mechanics. It's more of, as we say, it's the science of your business. But the intent is more of the art and the human mind. And so the thing that jumps out at me from a policy perspective is, is there any other provisions out there that would better address this type of violation where this police officer clearly had an intent to persuade or sway this type of investigation? Is there a more powerful, stronger policy out there than 1204 and 1807? I don't know. That's a question for both of you.
I would say no. The tentative to duty, like I said.
Yeah, when the case is brought, that's kind of one of the things that's looked at is what's the most applicable policies. Body worn recording equipment, obviously that's a clear one. I mean, potentially fail to write a complete report, but that again is going to be similar to attentiveness to duty. It's not I wouldn't say it's anything more serious than that. So I don't know that there would necessarily be, if you're asking about a more serious policy or a policy that has, quote, more teeth to it, I don't know that something like conformance to laws or it's not a standard of conduct issue. Those are the big ones where, you have potential legal, criminal law violations, things like that. Those are the policies that really have the most teeth. Excessive force, things of that nature. There's really nothing of that nature that would apply to this.
So, Captain, how many years on the force was Officer Boyden? I mean, was he a rookie or was he a
No,
veteran?
no,
He's not a rookie, he's over 10 years, so he's a master patrol
Okay.
officer. I want to say maybe 15, 16,
Okay.
off the top of my
I
head.
guess that's kind of like the thing that's kind of gnawing away at the back of my head here. The fact that he's a veteran, you know, he's got several years under his belt, he's experienced. So we look to standard of care, reasonableness of care, that type of thing, professionalism. So I could see if a rookie or somebody that was inexperienced would have, you know, neglected to turn on the body camera, or in the heat of the moment, because everything's going on, they would have forgotten to do one task or another task. But if you've been in the force for 10 or 15 years, you know what you're doing. And I think, when I think of it from that perspective, and then I look at the provisions that he was charged with, 1204 and 1807, again, as the Reverend said, you know, I don't want to belabor the point and beat a dead horse with a stick, but I just felt that there wasn't enough there, considering these unique circumstances that happened here in this case. That it's just a common one.
Well, I'd like to address to the board, tonight we had the presence of Chief Select Mary O'Connor, and she stated in her presentations how she's interested in receiving recommendations from the board and things of that nature. And it seemed like we were all on the same page in reference to, was there a policy that can better identify with this particular case that has a little bit more grip, a little bit more teeth. So that may be something that the board may be interested in bringing to the attention of Chief Select Mary O'Connor as well. And also the disciplinary action after this case was mishandled in numerous violations of a case, and that the crime scene, things weren't collected. She wasn't sent to the nursery, so there's a lot of failures in this particular case. And shining light on this, well, there's something that we can learn from it, and there's something that we can ensure that this type of behavior doesn't happen in the future. So again, I just want to stress to the board how they're open to a motion in reference to a recommendation. The chair is open as well if we find that the disciplinary action does not fit the deposition. So the chair is open. Any other further questions presented to the podium? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I give the board members a few moments to digest that presentation and that material as we create a motion or identify, after reviewing this case, what direction the board would like to move forward with.
Chair, did you see the three options are concur, or not concur, or enable
That's-
with reasons?
That's correct.
Okay.
The motion on whether we concur, not concur, or unable to reach determination regarding the disposition of the complaint and the discipline.
Mr. Chair, as part of the motion, also, do we include a recommendation at that point, or no?
Kamari Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. If the board would like to make a motion regarding the matter that's before them, and then make also, you know, follow up with a recommendation that could be made to staff, that certainly is an option. So you could do one of two things. You can have a recommendation, or you could also do a vote or make a motion regarding concur, do not concur, or unable to reach a decision regarding the matter that's before you. But you still have the option to make a recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kamara.
Mm-hmm.
I did like the commentary that Mr. Reyes suggested in reference to identifying a policy that had a little bit more grip and bite to a particular case like this. So that may be something that for further discussion in reference to creating a recommendation based off this particular case as a template. I think we all had concerns in reference to the disposition of receiving the letter of counseling. So again, in the motion is regarding the deposition of the complaint and the discipline.
I just need to ask something. You know,
Would you move, Ms. Guy?
we've been doing this for a long time, some of us here, sitting here, and often comes up when we look at the disciplinary action, and we've asked in the past for somebody to come in and talk to us about not only the disciplinary obligation, but the contractual obligation, because they are married. And I don't know that everybody understands that. And so when we go into a situation like this, I would imagine, no one's told me this, but I would imagine that at some point those two come together and there has to be a decision made based on what's contractually. The officers have a contract, so that part has to be in consideration when there is a disciplinary action. So, I mean, we brought it up before, and I don't know that I understand it any better than the first day I was on this board.
Mr. Chair, I think
Well, Reverend Banks.
part of the due process is that conversation that we've had around this table take place because of what we read. What we read was not complete based on what they said. Now, there are certain things that they're contractually obligated to do, and there are certain things that are quote-unquote legally obligated to do. So what I heard them say was their hands were tied to a certain degree because of a lack of cooperation from the victim in terms of her testifying to the fact that some of the things that appear to have happened that did not happen. Perhaps if that was included in the report, then the report perhaps would be a bit more tolerable. But absent some of that, it appears that this event took place and the end result was a letter of counseling without some of the intervening facts that may shed further light on it in terms of their hands being tied because of contractual obligations or lack of cooperation from the victim in terms of developing a case against the officer.
If you will.
Excellent.
Thank you, Reverend Banks. Excellent point.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I can read from the PBA contract. It's Article 38.2. No employee shall be disciplined except for just cause. Progressive, consistent, and appropriate discipline will be administered according to the seriousness of the offense. And then it goes into the order. The first form of discipline is an oral admonishment, and then a letter of counseling, and then a written reprimand, and then you have suspension, demotion, if the person's of rank, or dismissal would be the most serious. So I think probably what the board's focused on here is the seriousness of the offense. And on the surface, it does appear, and it is a serious offense. Now, as far as serious of the offense goes, as far as what actual harm was done to an individual, in an excessive force case and somebody has, broken bones and they've accumulated medical bills and things like that, the city could potentially have to, pay out sizable settlements. That's obviously very, very serious. In a case where the citizen who was involved didn't provide us a statement, didn't provide us evidence, didn't really come forward saying that they actually wanted anything done about this officer. I would have to say that the command staff looked at that as what could potentially happen if more severe discipline is imposed and that person grieves the discipline. There was an officer whose case was brought in front of the board last month who ended up resigning under investigation. It was the traffic stop. He was trying to pick up the female. We actually fired that officer years ago for an excessive force incident in Ybor City. And that officer got their job back through arbitration. So that's why that officer was still employed with the Tampa Police Department. So the contract and the discipline process and the grievance process has to be followed, because in the end, if we impose discipline that is not progressive, consistent, and appropriate based on the offense, we're just gonna get that overturned in the grievance process. So that's really the reason the discipline's imposed the way it is across the board, is because we have to go by the letter of this contract and what's in the four corners of the document, because that's what an arbitrator or the Civil Service Board is going to rule on in the future when that discipline ends up being grieved.
Yes, that material was very informational. I would like, as a request, if members of the board can also have access to that letter of contract, because in the past, in reviewing cases, there's been dialogue in reference to the disciplinary portion, but it'd be helpful if we had that list of items in reference to this violation and that violation, and what disciplinary action reflects that. So the material that you just read to, you stated that was a letter of contract.
That is the PBA contract, the collective bargaining agreement. I don't know, do we know?
It's not in.
Could the board get a copy of that PBA agreement?
Sure, yeah, I know it's listed on the city's website and the department's website. I'm sorry that the board's not been provided a copy of that before, just like our policies, procedure manuals, things like that.
And just as a comment, I wasn't complaining that we haven't been given a copy of it. I came out of a company that was union. I understand, I didn't have all the details in that contract, but union contracts pretty much say those same things. And, sometimes we get balled up in what we think is just to have happened. And, there are processes that are gone through. And, in this, if the victim had been open and talked about it, I have a feeling things would have gone a little differently. But just having the one video, I don't know, it seems to me that it makes it very difficult. I'm done.
Thank you, Ms. Guy.
Mr. Chair, Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. I will resend that for all the board members to have.
Okay, thank you. How does the board wish to continue in reference to a motion? And one of the other options is that we're unable to reach determination as well. So again, the chair is open to a motion.
Mr. Chair, should we go around asking for our opinion on how we should proceed, and we can make a decision?
Kamaria Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. So at this time, a motion needs to be made, and if a second is able to be obtained regarding the motion, then then a vote can proceed regarding that motion. But to go around each person to see how they would like to proceed is not according to your current rules of procedure and how you make a decision. So someone can just make a motion and see if there's a second to that motion and proceed with the vote.
So I'll make a motion not to concur.
Was that a motion not to concur?
Correct, not to agree with the disciplinary action.
Okay.
So there's a motion on the floor by Mr. Valdez in reference to not concurring with the disciplinary action of the disposition, correct?
Correct.
Do I have a second?
Question, is that the same? Can we vote on the disciplinary action, or we just vote on whether or not the policies were followed in terms of investigating and disposing of the case?
The motion should be twofold. Whether or not you agree with the process that occurred, the process and the discipline, the findings of the captain regarding this matter. So it's twofold.
So the process was that it was investigated based on internal complaint.
The findings and the discipline.
And the finding was sustained by the, so that's what we're voting on. We're not voting on whether or not we agree with the discipline part of it. That's outside of our scope, is my understanding.
You do have the authority to make a motion regarding whether or not you agree with the discipline that was imposed in this case.
That's contrary to what I've understood before, Mr. Smith.
And I'll explain it to you on the new.
We're not able to vote on the discipline aspect of it. We're able to vote on the process. And
Did they follow the process?
they follow the process.
The constraints that they were under.
Right, but in terms of what they,
That's the conflict.
because they used to not even give us the discipline. You know, that was something that we got after the fact because we requested it. But the discipline part of it was not included in the original reports that we received.
So we may not
In
necessarily
the
agree
new
with the
process.
discipline,
Right,
but the process and the constraints by which they were operating under, that's what we're looking
Right.
at, and that's my understanding.
right, right.
That's the
That's my
conflict.
understanding as well.
And that's my conflict right now,
Yeah.
because I'm,
If you will, Ms. Kamara, if you can
Thank
give us
you.
some direction, please.
We're again operating under the new ordinance. This provision of the new ordinance states that you can comment and make a motion regarding the discipline that's imposed.
Okay.
You're operating under the new ordinance.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so we can agree on the process, but disagree on the discipline aspect.
with a recommendation, and we can make a recommendation.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
What is
So-
the motion?
So there is a motion on the floor, and if you will, Mr. Valdez, can you repeat the
Yes, the
motion that's
motion
on the floor?
is to not concur, not to agree with the disciplinary action.
Would that be a complete motion? What about the other aspects of it?
Right, the process.
The bifold, so that would be the secondary part of that motion, but, and not to steer you in any direction on the motion, but do we all agree of the process of the investigation, but just really disagree on the disciplinary action? So does he need to restate the motion?
From the city attorney's office, you could certainly bifurcate your motion, and based upon the discussion of the board, it seems that that's where the board is leaning towards. You could certainly bifurcate your motion that you do not concur with the discipline that was imposed, but you may agree or concur with the findings of the captain in this matter. So you're certainly able to bifurcate your motion.
So as it stands, the motion is not concur with the disciplinary action. We concur with the process that it was used to determine the outcome of the case and how it came to light. And then the recommendation would be to be able to create a policy, as Member Reyes stated, more stricter around these type of instances and issues.
Do I have a second?
A second.
Mr. Reyes has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? We would now continue with the vote. All those in favor, show by raise of hand. All those opposed, show by raise of hand. The motion passes. That we concur on the process of the investigation and its findings, but we do not concur with the disciplinary action in the result of the case in reference to Officer Boyd.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. So with regards to the recommendation, what is the way ahead for that?
If you will, Ms. Kamaria.
Kamaria Pettis-Macker from the City Attorney's Office. Based upon the recommendation that was approved by the board, based upon the vote, that recommendation will then be sent to the Chief of Police. And there's a process that has to be followed based upon the new ordinance that was adopted. So we will follow that process to get the recommendation to the Chief of Police.
Yes, and in reference to the structure of the recommendation, is something that we can place on the agenda for next month to help create that recommendation to be presented to the Chief of Police?
Say that one more time?
In reference to the structure of the recommendation, I think some dialogue and discussion need to take place for the board to create such a recommendation to be shared with the select chief of police.
So you want to have further discussion on the recommendation before it's sent to the chief of police?
Do the board think that's necessary?
So what I'm hearing is our recommendation is to create a tougher or more stricter policy. Well, what is that gonna look like? Like, that's real broad. So what I'm hearing is that we would like to discuss with the chief more so in detail as to what that policy is going to look like. So it's not just left up in the air as to being just more tougher.
So, and I apologize, I know the captain wants to respond. You send your recommendation to the chief of police, and then the chief of police will then respond to that recommendation. That's the process. So it's in the new ordinance. So within 30 days of conclusion of the Citizen Review Board's review, the CRB shall forward its written findings and recommendation to the chief of police and affected officer. So that information, your recommendation will go to the chief of police. And there's a process that follows, that there will be a response also.
If you will, Mr. Reyes.
So, given the process and sunshine laws and all of that, are we to, right now in this setting, assemble together, get our thoughts together, and actually write something out for then
Staff
submission?
will work with writing something out and providing that to the mayor. Please don't be concerned with trying to write something out tonight. Oh, you can just verbally state what your recommendation is, and staff will make sure that the chief of police gets that. So please don't be concerned that you have to write something out, but your motion was to create a stricter policy. If you want to have further discussion about what that specific recommendation and guidance is before it's provided to the chief of police, that's certainly the board's pleasure.
If you will, Captain.
If I may, Captain Mesmer, again, professional standards, did the board actually, I want to make sure the board has the verbiage, what he was charged with and what was sustained, the actual policy, before we start talking about we need to write a new regulation. You have a copy of that? It's subsection 5 of the attentiveness to duty. Employees shall submit all required reports on a timely basis and in accordance with procedures. Employees will competently investigate all matters which require police attention and write reports when needed. Reports and investigations will be complete and shall be accomplished in such a manner as not to convey an indolent disposition on the part of the investigator. I mean, it pretty much covers exactly what happened in this case. So the board, obviously the board's pleasure can recommend, whatever the board would like, but as far as, our MORs, one of them can't say, well, this MOR, you're gonna get fired if you violate it, and this one you're not. And this is more serious than that. When there are certain ones like conformance to laws, obviously if an officer gets convicted of a felony or a serious criminal allegation, we're gonna fire that officer just based on that. But before the board, gets into specifics about wanting to write a new regulation, that regulation that was, that I just read, that was what was sustained on him, and it is very clear that he did not competently investigate the matter, and he did not write the appropriate report, and he did it in an indolent manner. So just pointing that out there for the board, that the policy does address everything that the officer did in this case.
So if I may comment on that, to go back to some earlier comments that I made, and I totally understand, and I agree with you on that. The provisions that he was charged with are basically the mechanics, the tasks that he was supposed to do or not do. The rubbing point, the sticking point that I have as a member is when I read the description and the summation, and I read that piece about the intent. And so when I read the provisions, I don't see anything about intent. And to me, if that police officer had some sort of intent which was other than honorable, that to me rises to another level, which I felt was not adequately provided for in the provisions that he was charged with, those two. So I agree with you. I'm not so sure it's an issue of rewriting the provisions, but it is one of understanding that there are nuances and levels of behavior and intent, and they are differentiated. And in this case, because of what happened And because of his punishment, what he was given, it just didn't seem right, given what had happened. And so I think that's what the board is grappling with right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes. Excuse me. So, again, to our understanding, the recommendation has been sent out. Staff will return with a follow-up in reference to that recommendation didn't sit well with us. And we will review that material, and if a presentation needed to be needed or a discussion needed to be made, and then move from that point. Is that correct, Ms. Kamaria?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I just want to verify, just for the captain and for staff, that the recommendation is to have or to modify the existing policies and procedures in order to address the intent of the officer. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
Okay.
Yes, it was, because in my mind, it was a behavioral issue as opposed to a mechanical issue. I mean, if just, he didn't fill out the paperwork correctly, that's one thing. But to attempt to persuade the victim, in my mind, that could be considered obstruction of justice, you know, from a layperson's standpoint. So it seems like there's a disconnect in terms of behavior and just simple mechanics. So some way of interpreting it such that it can be. And there again, I understand the limitations of not having a witness coming forward and your hands are tied in terms of technicalities and thrown out. But that's our feeling, my feeling.
I understand.
Okay. We'll continue with the, excuse me, Ms. Guy.
I think part of our issue is we always got the whole report before. Now we're getting sort of a synopsis of it. We used to get the complete report with the interviews and everything. And maybe that would have helped with understanding exactly what happened. I mean, I don't recall when we stopped getting the complete reports, but, right?
Yes, that's
Rashid?
correct, yes.
We used to get the complete reports, all the interviews, everything. It was up to us to go through them, but now we're getting a synopsis, which makes it a little more difficult to understand all the nuances that happened during whatever we're looking at. I mean,
I understand. Just regarding the table of contents and the information on the matter that's before you this evening, it looks as though staff did provide information that is available upon request. So I guess previously the board did not have to request that information, is what you're stating?
right, we wouldn't get just the overview, we would get the whole, we would have access to it. You could either pick it up or it would be emailed to us. And
Yes. So in reference to the BWC footage, in the past, we would have had access to review that information.
And I think that's still the
policy. It was in the package, but
I
now
think that's still
it's
this.
upon request.
Yes, correct. That is still, the board still has access to everything. There's just the information that's available upon request.
okay.
Okay?
So in future reference, when a case is selected and we do receive that synopsis, if there's a board member who wishes to have more impact on that particular case, we'll have to submit a request, and then they will fulfill that request and get you the information needed for reviewing purposes.
Question. So
Mr. Valdez.
I personally feel that we should be given all of the information as it comes from the very beginning. A lot goes on in our day-to-day life that we also have to take that into consideration, that if we are reviewing cases on the weekends or after hours and we don't have time to be able to request that information, we come here and then we hear the presentations and we don't have the full scope of what happened. So I would like to request to have that information sent to us with the cases prior to coming here, the full whole package. And is that something that has to go through the recommendation to the chief, or is that something that can be done?
So I can address that. We can provide that. If that was provided in the past, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't be able to. The reason that it was done by request is because If somebody does request that, at that point, we have to redact a lot of things, especially with the body camera video, we have to spend a lot of time redacting it. So if the board was not interested in that, then we weren't going to spend the time to do it unless it was requested. But if that's the pleasure of the board, we can continue to do that. We just have to understand that the videos are probably going to be too big to be able to email, so somebody would have to pick the videos up.
Well, we weren't getting the videos before, but we were getting the interviews.
The transcripts, yes.
The paperwork. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we don't, just get what we were getting before, it's fine. We don't have to get the videos from my perspective.
And they were redacted before. I mean, lots of names were taken out, but you got the interviews. I don't really care about seeing the tape because you've got all the interviews of the officers in there. So it gives you a much more clear understanding of what you all have gone through to come to your decision. And that's the only reason I brought it up, is because I think that is very helpful, especially to the new members who didn't have that before. But we used to get it all. And I'm not sure when it changed. It may have been when we started emailing everything, and maybe emailing it was an issue. I'd have to leave that to the attorney to make that decision. That's when it really stopped, was when we started emailing all the documents to the members. And but I know for me, it certainly made me understand better and be empathetic one way or the other, because you did see all the interviews, so it was very helpful.
Well, we'll change it back then.
Thank you. Sounds great.
You are so easy.
Any other questions or statements or concerns in reference to item 8, case being reviewed?
It's late, but I
Yes.
am confused about what we're sending to, as far as, okay, the vote was that we disagreed, did not concur. The board does not agree with the discipline, but they agree with the disposition of the complaint. And
That's correct.
what are we expecting from the chief or from the captain? What are we expecting from them? That's what I'm confused on.
In reference to the recommendation portion, that staff will get back with us with a recommendation that we can open up a discussion and either help shape it or edit, or whatever the case may be, have some discussion upon that. If you will, Ms. Camario, can you give us some assistance on the recommendation format that would come back from staff?
So what's been informed is traditionally the recommendation is made by the board, and then the recommendation is then sent to the chief of police. The chief of police will then respond or acknowledge the recommendation and determine whether or not the recommendation is going to be adopted by the chief of police. So there is a process in place under the new ordinance, but if I still hear a question about whether or not that's truly the recommendation of the board, you could simply table this. We could draft a simple recommendation, bring it back before the board for the next meeting to see if that's truly what you want to send to the chief of police.
Yes, any discussion?
I don't know what the
That works for me.
recommendation is.
Yes, so it seems like the board is
still wanna
on
talk
board
about
with seeing what is returned, and at that point, open up discussion to see if it fits what the board is trying to, the message sent to the chief.
I will draft that proposed recommendation and have it before the board, and we will discuss it at the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Thank you, Ms. Kamara.
We just want you to decipher what we said. Because we don't
Tell
know.
me what we said.
It's recorded, so that's good.
Okay, so continuing with the agenda, Community and Tampa Police Department matters. I know we had the Chief Select, Ms. Mary Connor here earlier, and that typically would have fit under Community and Tampa Police Department matters, but I moved that particular item up under the approval of the minutes. I just want to ensure that there wasn't any additional information need to be presented to the board.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we don't have anything for number 9, but I do have some items for number 10 for staff reports.
Okay, that concludes item 9 under the agenda. We will continue to item 10, CRB staff reports and business, if you will, Captain.
Sure. So one of the requirements of the new ordinance is that I inform the board about any changes in specific policies. There's a list of several of them, mainly our high liability policies, things of that nature, the collective bargaining agreement, and so forth. The Officers' Bill of Rights, certain public records laws. So I'm just here to tell you there are no changes to any of that at this board meeting. In addition to that, we have the annual report, which I believe has been provided to you. So this is actually based upon Section I of the new ordinance, number 3. So the annual report now is required to have certain items in it that was not required before. It looked like I was reviewing some of the past ones, and they basically were a compilation of the minutes from the meetings throughout the year.
Yes.
We've kind of abandoned that because the ordinance now requires the annual report to consist of certain things. So I have the cover page. Section 1 is basically an overview of the CRB. It kind of goes into some details about what the CRB is, what the CRB can do, and then has your names on there. Section 2 goes into the matters that have been considered by the board in 2021. There is a list on here, a table of the different policy violations and regulations that were contained in the 11 cases that the board considered last year, as well as the disposition that the department found with those specific policy violations. Your recommendations and your motion for your concurrence or non-concurrence was also addressed in there. I believe there was one case, or excuse me, that's in a different section. In addition to these cases, we had a motion from the mayor's task force on policing, was asked to come in front of the board and speak. That occurred. We had a presentation on the new mental health co-responder pilot program. The quality assurance report was given to you. We had a presentation on the crime-free multi-housing program when that issue was brought up, which is now turned into the SAFE program. Chief Delgado came back on that last month, but that wasn't included in this report because it's only for 2021. And then there were several discussions about the proposed changes to the city ordinance, and then 2 of the 3 training sessions. The third one actually happened in 2022, so that wasn't included there. So that was Section 2. Section 3, that's the summary of the citizen complaints. And remember, that was beginning with January of 2022 is when we provided the list of the complaints to you on a monthly basis.
Yes.
So this was actually all the complaints that occurred in 2021. So most of this was never provided to the board because that happened prior to the new ordinance coming into effect. But these are our records of citizen complaints and then the method that the complaint was brought to the police department. There was a mention in here about the new email address that was created pursuant to the ordinance that we have to check. In 2021, that did not exist, so we didn't have any complaints come in through the email address. Section 4 were the findings and the conclusions of the board, so that went into the actual cases that the concurrence, non-concurrence are unable to reach a decision from 2021. There was one case, if you recall, where the board was unable to reach a decision, and that was the case involving the city's B1.2 policy on discriminatory conduct. I believe the board wanted some more information regarding the previous history, and that information could not be provided at the time of the meeting because there was pending litigation involved in that case. So that was the reason in that one case while the board was unable to reach a decision, and then they concurred with the findings of the department in the other 10 cases. Section 5 was the recommendations that the board made. There were no specific recommendations made last year by the board. And then section 6 dealt with the involvement of city council. That again was a new requirement in December of '21. So while city council was not required to attend a board meeting during 2021, the clerk did start recording that in June. So I did note that Council Chair Goods and Councilman Citro were both at the June 2021 meeting. And then section 7 is, that is your option to write a written statement to be included with the annual report. So obviously that part of it would need to be discussed by the board and with Ms. Pettis-Mackle to see what the board's pleasure is about the written statement. And
Thank you,
I would
Captain.
entertain any questions, comments, concerns about the annual report.
I have a question,
Mr.
Captain.
Reyes?
So, as part of the requirements is that has to be presented or briefed to the city council, right?
So yes, so today the board, the report is presented to the board. I believe next month's meeting, it would have to be approved after either any changes need to be made to it or the statement, the board decides to write a statement and include that. And then within 60 days of the approval, that has to be presented to city council by Chair Akil and any other board members who would like to attend, and also myself.
Is that during one of their scheduled city council meetings?
Yes.
On Thursdays? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And question, you
Or
had
Mr.
mentioned
Valdez?
it was sent to us, or is it going to be sent to us?
It was emailed. Does everyone not have it?
Did it come through your email or someone
No,
else's?
Yeah,
the annual report.
I know, I'm aware that I had some email challenges, so I'm waiting to see what's wrong. I had to take a look. I know some of my emails recently was going to my
Who would it have
spam
come
folder.
from?
But it should have come from Ms. Wilcox,
Okay.
like the standard
And Mr.
email
Chair-
line that we receive.
I will, inadvertently, I thought it was sent to all of you. I will email it to everyone on the, I'm sorry. I will email it to everyone on the board. If we can, I would, if it's the board's pleasure, once you're able to review the annual report, we could certainly discuss it at the next agenda meeting.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
Mr. Chair?
yes, if you will.
Is it
Reverend Banks?
feasible to have a standard email that we get correspondence from? Because we're getting correspondence from names that I'm not familiar with, and I have thousands of emails that go into.
So
we
you-
need to know who to look for. So is it?
I think that's a difficult, I know I certainly emailed the board members. I know our clerk, Ms. Wilcox, emails the board, and any staff who's responsible regarding providing the documents email to the board. I think it's hard to gauge that it will only be, I understand, Reverend
Once we
Bates.
get used to it, then we'll know. Maybe a list of the emails, perhaps we could do so we know who to search for. You know, for example, the case came out from Katie, and I did a CRB search. Maybe if you put CRB in the subject matter some way, then we can do a query, say CRB, then anything with CRB on it would pop up. Because I did a query for that, and I got Tonia's emails, but I didn't get Katie's, and I had to remember, well, who could have sent the document out? And finally, I did tampa.gov, and it popped it up that way to see whatever came. I had to look at all of those emails to try to find stuff. So even this, so you're saying this report didn't get emailed to all of us?
It did not get emailed. I apologize. I thought it was emailed to the board. I will take care of that. When I take care of that, I will provide the list, a common list of email addresses that you will receive, so you'll know in advance.
Okay.
I'll take care of that.
Then the person that sent something out, she sent a corrected email that said, "I'm sorry, you were not on my original list." So whoever is sending emails out on behalf of the board, be sure they have all of our names so that we can,
Yes, sir.
eventually we'll be familiar with the names. But
Yes, sir.
At this point, you know, it's kind of difficult to know who to look
I understand.
for emails from.
I understand.
Thanks.
Continuing under Community Tampa Police Department matters, do we have a monthly complaint tracking sheet for this particular month?
Yep, I believe that was sent back on February 1st.
Did anyone receive the monthly complaint tracking?
We don't know.
Not to my knowledge. I didn't either.
Mike Schmid, Sin City Attorney. We're all learning, right, from little bumps along the way here with this new ordinance. There's a whole lot of new things here. So as of the first, the rules require that we send it to the chair. That's specifically what it says. So we send it to the chair because that's what the rule says. However, in the future, we will also bring a copy to discuss with you. I don't think we brought a copy of it tonight. All we did was we sent it to the chair, unfortunately, so we didn't bring a copy for a discussion tonight. We will make sure we, in the future, bring all copies so we can have a discussion if there is one to be had on the complaint tracking system.
So is it in the new ordinance that the chair receives the monthly complaint tracking? Could we implement that into the total email where we can share that material with the other board members so we can all get it simultaneously so they have the opportunity to review it as well? So when we do come in for a meeting, everyone can be on the same page?
I don't see why not. It does technically, the ordinance, we are following the letter of the ordinance by only sending it to you, but I don't see why it couldn't be shared with everybody.
That'd be great.
But you would share it with us.
Yeah,
Yes.
Captain Messmer will send out it'll come from either Captain Messmer or Detective Thanasis.
Could we include the monthly complaint tracking system with the annual report so we can have that material prior to our next month meeting?
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna send the annual report. I have that. I will definitely send that.
As well as the monthly
We'll resend out
complaint tracking, tracking
February-
the list?
the report from March that we sent out February 1st, yes.
Okay.
Sorry, January.
Any other questions, statements, concerns for Captain in reference to item 10, CRB staff reports and business? No. Okay, that concludes item 10, CRB staff reports and business. Move on to item 11, items continued. This particular item was placed on the agenda to keep the board abreast of case numbers that are still out there that hasn't necessarily been closed for us to review some additional information. So that's why those items in there. Any questions or statements in concern to those two case numbers?
Mr. Chair, if I
Yes,
may,
well, Captain.
the first case number on there, that was requested by the board to follow up on the CJSTC action for Officer Magarosi. So that hearing actually occurred last week, and we received information that they did find probable cause. So at this point, he has received notice, so he will have the option to either set a disciplinary hearing in front of the board, or the board he can voluntarily surrender his law enforcement certification to the board.
Great,
So they did find probable cause in that case.
thank you.
So based upon that update, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
can I remove item number 1 from the continued case, the items continued on the agenda, since the board was just updated by the captain regarding that case?
Yes,
Okay. And we will still keep item number 2 on the agenda under the
Yes.
continued items?
yes. Could we have that update stated within the minutes as well, so members that are absent tonight will have the opportunity to review that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That would conclude item 11, items continued. We'll now move on to announcements and new business under item 12.
Mr. Chair, Kamari Pettis-Mackle from the City Attorney's Office. If you could just announce our next meeting is March 22nd of 2022 at 6 p.m.
The next meeting will be held on the fourth Tuesday of the month of March 22nd at 6 p.m. here at Old City Hall. And I encourage board members, for any reason, if you're unable to attend the next meeting, please notify our city clerk at least 48 hours in advance to ensure we have a voting forum. Now, we understand that there could be circumstances, and we'll be able to adjust accordingly. But again, it's very important to ensure a voting forum or a quorum, especially when we have special guests and things of that nature. So I just want to re-implement the importance of giving notification if one is absent, so we adjust the agenda if necessary.
And Mr. Chair, just to follow up, if by any chance no one remembers our city clerk's email, you're welcome to email me as well, and call me if you have an emergency, but just to let us know in advance that you will not be able to make the meeting. Yes.
I do have a scheduled conflict for the next meeting.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the notification. You with Mr. Valdez?
So I have a question. So more in particular for those members that haven't finished their training as it relates to the onboarding to the board, do we have a time limit that we require members to?
We do, and yes, Mr. Valdez, there is a time limit. We're certainly going to address that time limit, send an email to address that time limit. But there is a time frame based upon the new ordinance on which a member has time in order to come into compliance with the requirements.
And are we doing anything to fulfill the other two positions that have become vacant? Because now
Administration is aware of the vacancies.
I'm concerned with the fact that, if one member misses, we don't have a quorum, so there's not much that, we can do. So definitely want to make sure that we fill the seats quickly, and that there's an expectation that the members coming in, that you have that timing the matter to fulfill the requirements to be able to then fully be embedded into the board.
I understand.
Question, does the quorum have to be maintained for the entire meeting or at the beginning of the?
That is correct.
Okay.
Before I adjourn this meeting, I would like to give any of our board members the opportunity to add any final comments or statements at this time. Hearing none, thank you, and please be safe. The Citizen Review Board is now adjourned.
Okay, when I was vice chair, we never went to 8:15. I'm just pointing that out to you.
We had some 8:15 nights. Not
Okay. Next question. One of these two structures is crossing the 7-foot line. Why can it not just be moved 3 feet closer to the house?